Just before I begin, I just wanted to give a little bit about the context of education in Canada. Canada does not have a federal Department of Education. Education is a provincial or a territorial responsibility, and CTF is a national federation that, as one of its roles, lobbies at the federal level in those areas that support education, not in education per se. La Fédération canadienne des enseignantes et des enseignants, FCE, est une alliance nationale de 16 organisations provinciales et territoriales qui représentent près de 200 000 enseignantes et enseignants des écoles élémentaires et secondaires du Canada. La FCE adhère aussi à l'International de l'éducation. En tant que voix unifiée des organisations de l'enseignement du Canada, en ce qui touche l'éducation et les questions sociales connexes, la FCE a pour mission de promouvoir une éducation publique, inclusive et de qualité, de mettre en valeur la profession enseignante et de défendre la liberté d'apprendre. Les enseignantes et enseignants du Canada estiment qu'un système d'éducation publique solide, financé par l'État et fondé sur les principes de l'universalité, de l'équité, de l'adaptabilité et de la responsabilité est essentiel pour soutenir et promouvoir une société démocratique qui œuvre pour le bien de tous et toutes. It follows, then, that the development of educational policy should be grounded in the belief that public education is a public good for the whole of society. CTF's strategic vision is that by 2020, when we celebrate our 100th anniversary, we expect our organization to be the national bilingual go-to voice for publicly funded public education in Canada, and this includes being a strong driver for change in public education. Governments have a responsibility to provide adequate and stable funding to school boards and districts to enable them to fulfill their mandate to provide access to quality public education for all children. This includes providing funding and other resources for students with a range of special educational needs, including mental health needs, as well as adequately funding First Nations schools. The fact that we, as teacher organizations, need to reframe or even assert and defend the idea that governments should be adequately funding the public education system to a broader public is indicative of the success of the right-wing agenda in fundamentally altering the education debate for its own ideological ends. The negative impact of decades of neoliberal ideology has seen the erosion of public education through reforms such as privatization, standardization, test-based accountability, and economic austerity, all part of what Pasi Sahlberg has coined the Global Education Reform Movement, or GERM. This has resulted in a significant narrowing of educational purpose and an erosion of the fundamental concept of education as a basic human right and a public good. Over the course of the next few slides, I will outline just some of the ways in which the neoliberal ideology is manifesting itself in Canada and how CTF member organizations are pushing back. I'll also provide a few examples of how the CTF is leading and coordinating further efforts to counter this regressive agenda. The government of Newfoundland and Labrador, one of the Canadian provinces, tabled an austerity budget this spring that targets public education, while on the one hand, it is implementing a new full-day kindergarten program. It is, on the other hand, at the same time, cutting 219 teaching positions, leading to larger class sizes and split-grade classrooms. As the Newfoundland and Labrador Teacher Association puts it, their government is turning its financial deficit into an education deficit. A typical strategy of neoliberal governments is to divide interests. In this case, a false dichotomy has been created, forcing a seeming choice between believing, on one hand, that children deserve an early start at education, and on the other, believing adequate services should be provided to support today's diverse classrooms. The Newfoundland and Labrador Teachers Association, along with all teachers in Canada, stand together to assert this is a false choice. Policy decisions should be based on what is best for the population, not on what helps balance the books. Au Québec, les mesures d'austérité du gouvernement se sont traduites par l'importante compression dans les programmes sociaux et un accroissement de la pauvreté chez les familles. Les écoles publiques en ressentent les effets. Au début des récentes et interminables négociations, le gouvernement voulait augmenter de 3 heures la semaine de travail du personnel enseignant, accroître le rapport élèves et enseignants à l'élémentaire et réduire le financement, sans parler de son intention d'éliminer les centaines de postes d'enseignants ressources ou enseignants ressources. Il a fallu une série de grèves d'une journée pour ces exigences soient retirées du programme de négociation et qu'on puisse arriver à un règlement négocié. C'est avec fierté que je me suis jointe à mes collègues au Québec à l'occasion d'une de ces journées aux côtés d'autres membres du comité exécutif de la FCE. In Ontario, a Liberal Premier who described himself as the education premier passed legislation called Putting Students First Act that was intended to ensure that school contracts fit the government's financial and policy priorities and aimed to prevent labor disruptions during 2013 and 14. It was claimed that the law would save the province of Ontario $2 billion. It gave the minister the authority to withhold the approval of collective agreements or to impose agreements in line with government priorities. A charter challenge was filed by ETFO, and the Ontario Court recently found that the Ontario government's bill was a violation of the collective bargaining rights of education unions. Similarly, as many here will know, and we heard last night, the BC is currently appealing a court ruling regarding provincial legislation that unilaterally changed collective agreements. Various CTF member organizations, including all Ontario affiliates, are working together as interveners at the Supreme Court of Canada in support of the BCTF. So what can be done on a broader scale? The consensus of progressive organizations was that after 10 years of a regressive neoliberal federal government, the only option open to us was to work toward electing a government with policy more in line with what we believe. The CTF's contribution to this was the Hear My Voice campaign with the slogan as seen on this slide, I teach, I vote. The CTF election campaign was designed to inform teachers of party positions, to encourage members to vote for candidates who aligned with the beliefs of teachers. The captions state that what teachers were voting for, our Canada, our students, our profession, in support of democracy. The campaign was successful with over 18,000 page views on our campaign website on election day alone, and over 12,500 individual users accessing the information provided. Together with other progressive voters, Canada has elected a government that seems to be casting aside austerity budgeting in favor of running deficits to invest in the country. It remains to be seen if federal Liberals will keep their progressive promises. Having a federal government that at least appears open to listening to the voices of teachers means that our advocacy efforts are actually on the rise. And yes, part of our job at CTF now turns to keeping the government's feet to the proverbial fire. While governments are important players in neoliberalism, the real driver of this agenda comes from corporations. The privatization of education isn't new. What has changed over the past few decades is the sheer scope of corporate involvement in the education sector. The growth of so-called low-fee private schools in many developing countries is but one troubling example. Another extremely worrying action is the recent proposal by UK Prime Minister David Cameron to eliminate all traditional public schools and replace them with private academies. Excuse me. The British equivalent of charter schools. The involvement of the publishing giant Pearson and other edu-businesses in the education sector is a growing concern, particularly in terms of their influence on the direction of education policy. Education International's global response to privatization and commercialization campaign, in which CTF plays a key role, has been developed to attempt to address these critical issues. Recently, CTF was present at the Pearson annual shareholders meeting in support of a resolution calling on Pearson to review its business strategy, including education commercialization and its support of high-stakes testing and low-fee private schools. While the resolution did not pass, it really wasn't expected to, but the idea received significant support, and it is but one step along the way. Excuse me. Unfortunately, Pearson senior management doesn't seem to be willing to acknowledge the problems they are facilitating. Comments from Pearson CEO Michael Fallon at the meeting indicated that in regard to low-fee schooling, Pearson is filling a need created by government's refusal and/or inability to meet its obligations. According to Fallon, they're on the same side as teachers in that they want a quality education for all children and cannot, in good conscience, stand by while millions of children are missing an opportunity at an education. Further, in response to a question from Education Partners, Michael Barber, Pearson's education advisor, commented that there are a number of lessons being learned by Pearson in schools in the Global South that may inform educational practices in other jurisdictions. According to Pearson, they're philanthropists helping out the poorest children in the world while governments are unwilling or unable. Despite this narrative, it is clear that the schools and students in the Global South are being used as a laboratory for teaching methodologies that Pearson hopes to sell in the North. And profit, not quality education, is really its only motive. The CTF will continue to contribute to the global response to halt the privatization, commercialization of education through funding research, raising awareness with colleagues and the public, supporting our sister and brother unions throughout the developing world to be strong advocates for publicly funded public education and the teaching profession and more. Les syndicats de l'enseignement demeurent parmi les plus grands défenseurs d'une éducation publique inclusive et de qualité. Nous comprenons le lien important entre l'éducation publique, la démocratie et le bien public, ce qui devient extrêmement important dans un monde où les idées et des acteurs du marché et du monde des affaires dominent pratiquement tous les secteurs de la société, y compris, et le plus en plus, l'éducation. We must continue to be vigilant against the increasing infiltration of the germ. Governments must be made to believe that education is a human right, to be provided at no cost by the government, and not something to be paid for by those who can afford it. Thank you. Merci.